recorded, so it is going to be available to the district later on our YouTube channel, as well as our district Facebook. So just as a courtesy heads up, it will be will be recorded tonight. So I know there's a lot of unanswered questions out there. I know everyone's wanting to know really what school is going to look like in the fall. So tonight I'm here to try and answer as many of those questions. Still people coming in as I can. I will tell you though, by the end of the night, there still are questions out there that are unanswered. So I'm not going to have all the answers to every question tonight, but I'll answer certainly as many as I can, any of them that I have the answers for. So let's see, is there anything else I wanted to begin with? Anything else before we start? So tonight we're going to begin with updating our community with the results of the survey. We had a community survey that went out a couple of weeks ago. And so I want to start by updating you on the information and the results from that survey, just so you have an understanding of where the information is coming from. Again, we'll begin with that information, and then we'll provide you an update on where we're at with our district planning, where we're at in the stage with that. And then following that, we'll do the question and answer session. So if you'll hold your questions to the end, because I'm sure throughout this, I'll be able to answer many of your questions throughout this, but like I said, we'll have an opportunity for that. So I'm going to start with sharing the information. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to bring the participants back up in case I have any other folks looking to join. Okay, I'm ready. So what tonight, the beginning of this, you're going to see is we asked our community, staff, students, parents, any community members, if they would take a survey for us that would give us some information on their thoughts on restarting school in the fall. So the first part of this is the information you're going to see from there. Was pleased with the response from our community. We had 407 responses, as you can see. So I was pleased with the turnout from the survey. So there's just information you can see on that. And from there, we asked everyone, what is your relationship in the survey? Are you a student, parent, staff, others? And as you can see on here, over half of the respondents, over 53% were parents that responded to this survey, which is 219 responses. 72 students responded to this, which is just over 17%. And then you can see we also had staff respond. 79 staff responded. That's a pretty good number considering, give or take, in the district we have about 110 staff. So, again, pretty close to 80% of our staff responding to that. And we had 37 others, grandparents, other community members, didn't have any direct parents, but that responded to the survey. So that's really who made up this survey. So from there, we are going to go to the first question on the survey we asked was, understand that we don't have a clear picture of what the fall will bring. How would you rate your current readiness in terms of your level returning to school next fall? So we had questions all the way from I'm ready to go, no concerns at all, just let's get back to school, all the way to I do not plan on returning back to school and planning on enrolling in an online option. And so you can see almost 1 in 4 here in this blue category came back and said, 97 respondents says, hey, I'm ready to come back to school. Just, I have no worries. I'm not concerned about anything. Just get me back to school. Sorry, we've got some people still coming in, I'm admitting. We had 156 respondents say, I'm ready. I'm confident schools will have everything safe and ready to go. So just under 40% said, hey, I'm ready to get back to school. I'm sure you'll make your plans and be good to go. We had 59 respondents come back and say, I'm ready, but I am worried. I'm worried about what's out there. So that would be, I'm having to move my box, apologize. Just under 15% says I'm ready, but I've got some worry. 72 responded, which is just about 17%, a little over that, saying I'm ready to return. I'm going to come back, but only if you make some adjustments and create some additional safety precautions as it relates to coming back to school. I'll talk about those later, what those could and might look like. And then you had the final two categories, which is I don't plan on returning, which would be 4.4%, and saying they plan on enrolling. They're hoping the Columbia School District has an online option. They plan on doing something else. And then you had 5 responded, which was just over 1%, saying that they don't plan on returning to the Columbia School District and enrolling in another online option outside of the Columbia School District. So it gives you kind of an idea of how people are feeling about their readiness to return in the fall. So next question we asked, if you look at that and want to, I've separated that by how students responded to the same question. You can also see staff, parents, and others. I'll just give you a minute to take a look at these numbers. It's the same question, but that's now separated by the different groups taking the survey. So again, your blue and your red are I'm ready to come back, no concerns or confident. Your yellows are your I'm ready to come back, but I'm worried. And your green is I plan to return, but only to take additional precautions. And the last two would be online options. So let me give you a minute to take a look at that, to see what everyone's thinking about coming back to school. Okay, so if we move on, the additional question was if we're given the approval to reopen in the fall, which at this time when this was written, we weren't sure exactly what that looked like, but we are going to be opening in the fall. We know that already. So that's why, again, this was a couple weeks old. But what safety precautions would you rate as the top priorities? And you can see here the top 2 priorities of everyone. This is combining everyone. The 2 main concerns were sanitizing classrooms here in blue, and we'll call it this peachish, pinkish color, and frequent hand washing. Those were the 2. You had 21 and 22%. Those were the most concerns concerning people taking the survey. So let me open this back up. So again, let you take a look at that. We looked at everything else from maintaining social distancing in the classrooms to in larger groups. Probably the next largest one is health screenings, because there's some information out there about required health screenings before coming into school. You can see over here in these colors, staff wearing protective masks, students wearing protective masks. Those are over here. What the concern is, 8 and 7%. Students not sharing equipment, lockers, things like that is at just under 10% at 9.8. 2 biggest concerns, everyone taking the survey, is sanitizing classrooms and frequent hand washing. Okay. So with that, our goal is to bring back students in a traditional schooling model. So we've said that right from the get-go. Our goal is to bring back students 5 days a week and as close to a traditional model as possible. That is our goal at the district, provided we can do that at meeting specific requirements established at the state and local level. If we're not able to open in a traditional manner, so a traditional 5 day a week, the question was which of these following models best fits would work with your family. So again, this is assuming we cannot open in a traditional model. The overwhelming favorite was alternating days at 45%. Again, this is the combined. So 183 responded that was their favorite model. And then following that, you had 96 that responded half days. And then subsequently, you can kind of see as it moves along, 41 responded at just at 10%, dividing by subjects. The 2 phase-in approaches involves phasing in, starting in with a smaller group, and then slowly broadening that, bringing more kids in later. You'd have a phase-in based on need, academic need, and then a phase-in based on age, starting with your youngest students, then working to the older ones. And then your last option, which 24 responded, was just under 6%, not interested, coming back online only. So again, if we were forced to go to an alternate model, the alternating days, you're hearing that called a lot AB schedules, whether on a day, off a day, or on several days, off certain days. That's what this is looking like. So same thing with this question. If you want to look at and see what the different people that answered this question between students, staff, parents, and others, what that looks like, but all the groups had the alternating days as their favorite model. So I'll give you a minute to take a look at that. Okay, I'm going to continue. So we had a transportation question because there's a question about transportation and getting kids to and from school in the fall. So do you ride the bus to and from school, and do you plan on changing those plans based on what's happening? And you can see we had 42%. Sorry, I'm letting some more folks in. 42% said that yes, they do currently ride the bus and they plan to continue. So that's a good number. We did have just under 10% said, 28 responded that yes, I do ride the bus, but I plan on changing those plans once school starts. So that gives us the idea that we may not have as many students on the bus in the fall as we did last year because of concerns due to COVID. Interestingly enough, we did have 5 respondents that said that they had not ridden the bus in the past, but plan to start once school resumes. And 46% said that they don't ride the bus. They have other transportation plans, walk, someone gives them a ride, whatever, and they plan on continuing that. They will not be taking transportation. So, okay. So this is an interesting topic conversation because this comes up to one of the more controversial pieces, which is face coverings. So this question was asked, Washington State Department of Health right now, their current stance right now as it sits today is that they would require face coverings for all staff and students on-site for on-site instruction and for attending district events. So the question was, what type of personal protective equipment do you prefer? Cloth masks, disposable masks, or face shields? So this was just to try and get an idea if people had a preference one way or the other. And you can see cloth masks were the overwhelming favorite at just over 53%. You had disposable masks coming in second with 99 response, just under 25%. 1 in 4 said disposable. And at the time, there's an update on this one. 22% said face shields. And at the time when the survey was written, you can see there was a note on the survey that said face shields are not currently approved by the Department of Health at the state or local level, but could be an option in the future. What we know right now, since this survey has gone out, is that our local and state level health department has approved the use of face shields. So we can use those instead of masks at this point. So I'm curious, and I'll never know, but I don't know if this affected any of the results. The fact that, that when this was written, they weren't approved. I don't know if people didn't go to that because of that, or if people really do like cloth masks. But just know that the face shield is an approved device now for schools in our local county. So if you want to look at how this plays out, students, staff, parents, and community members, you can see how this question concerning the face coverings, the cloth masks was the, you can see, was the favorite of all the groups, staff, students, and parents, with the exception of the others. They had the face shield as the favorite, but other than that, the cloth mask was the favorite of the groups answering the survey. Okay, if we continue. Was technology an issue for your family this past year in accessing materials, lessons, office hours, communication? So this is really trying to get, if we are forced to go to what they call continuous learning 2.0, which is basically something similar to what was done last spring with online learning, what is the challenges that we're presented with concerning technology? So what would that look like? 80% of those taking the survey said technology was not an issue. You had almost 14%, again, saying technology wasn't an issue. and 18% saying technology is an issue, but wireless specifically, connectivity was an issue. We have to keep in mind that these are obviously folks taking the survey, so that we're letting some more folks in. That number could be a little artificially high because the folks having difficulty with technology obviously wouldn't be taking the survey or wouldn't be as readily available to them. So it just gives us an idea of what that would look like. So if you take all the survey results, the question really is, what is this telling us? What is this information from the survey telling us? If you look at it in these terms, it's telling us almost 2/3, not quite 2/3, but almost 2/3 of staff, students, parents, community members are not worried and are confident schools will be safe in the fall. So that would be taking the first two categories. You combine those. 62% said we're not worried, we're confident schools will be safe, we're ready to come back. 1 in 3, almost 33%, are planning on coming back, but are worried, have some concerns concerning COVID and that. So, and you also have just under 6% at 5.7 that plan on enrolling in an online option, whether that's a Columbia School District online option or they're looking elsewhere for an alternate online option, which gives us the indication. Again, these are those that are just taking the survey. Maybe with the idea of those not taking the survey, if they've already planned on doing another option, they wouldn't have taken the survey. So just gives kind of a quick indication of what that might look like. Top 2 safety precautions as we look at this continue to be sanitizing classrooms, surface spaces, and frequent hand washing. And the calls that we have to the health department, I can tell you, sitting in on those each week, they continue to push the hot water and soap is the best thing we can do out there for this. There's a lot of companies and things out there selling fancy products and spray products and things like that, and they continue to push, we need to be washing. Hot water and soap are the best things we can continue to do. What else? So what else is the survey information telling us? Keep in mind, our goal is to get students back 5 days a week. I said that earlier. I'll continue to hear me say that again later in this. We're trying to come back in as close to traditional manner as possible. But if we are forced to go to an alternate schedule, alternating days is the preference. You saw that on there. That would look like students attending full days of learning at school with days of online learning at home. So you would alternate kind of an A-B schedule. Again, nothing has been decided. If we're forced to go to some alternate schedule, we'd have to have conversations about what days are you going A-B, A-B, A-A, B-B, switching up, and how does that work for families and students and things like that. But we're not there yet because our first goal is to try to get us all back 5 days a week. So cloth masks are the preferred choice for facial coverings concerning personal protective equipment. As I mentioned previously, face shields will be an option per Walla Walla County Health Department. And again, technology was not an issue for over 80% of our community. So we're gonna have to commit to find out who and where those students are if we have to go to an online option that are having difficulty with technology or wireless connectivity. So coming back to our goal. Our goal is to get staff and students back on site in school 5 days a week in a safe manner that protects all parties involved. And we do this because we believe that this is in the best interest for our community to get back to school in as close to normal, traditional manner as possible. That's our goal. We believe that's best for our Columbia School District community, and that's what we're setting out trying to do. We've got to be able to make sure we get that done in a safe manner. So that's what we have to work with our local health departments and at the state level to make sure those things will happen. I'll kind of take you through. We're going to shift from the survey to kind of now the planning process and where we're at with this. So where are we at currently in our plans? No final plans have been made. Hopefully you've heard me say that, but I'll say it again. None of the plans have been finalized yet. We're still in kind of the developing plan phase. And the reason that is because the information we have to develop these plans continues to evolve. As we began this in the spring, these plans were, and the information we were getting was literally changing minute by minute. and it's now slowed to where it went from minute by minute, but from one day to the next. And unfortunately, we're still getting new information from one week to the next now that changes how these plans will evolve. So the reason we don't have a finalized plan yet is because the information continues to evolve, and we're trying to adapt and get that information as soon as possible. But what we don't want to do is put out a plan and then have to change it and then continue to change it and change it again. We want to get a solid plan that we feel good about, that we know it's going to be able to stick with and get that out to our community. The goal for plans is we're hoping to finalize our plans by the end of July or early August. And the idea is, you can see the cartoon on the right with all the different plans. We're preparing to bring to our community and the board and our health department at least 3 plans. And there's a reason for that, because as I mentioned above, the information we continue to get is evolving. And so we're gonna make a standard plan that the state and health department right now says currently meets all standards. The standard we have to meet now is 6 feet concerning distancing for our students. So we're gonna create a 6-foot plan. Sorry, I'm letting some more folks in. So we'll create, as I said, a 6-foot plan with social distancing in mind at 6 feet. There's also some information out there that's new as of this last week from the American Pediatrics that's looking at adjusting that number. They're suggesting that we go from 6 feet to 1 meter, which would be just over 3 feet. And so that's why there's still some information, depending on if you have to space students 6 feet apart or just over 1 meter apart. That would obviously change the number of students we can put in rooms and classrooms and things like that. So again, the information we continue to get is evolving, and that's why we don't have a finalized plan out there. But we're going to come to our community with a 6-foot plan, with a 3-foot plan, and we're hoping, we believe that 3-foot plan, we're pretty confident will be an all-school kind of traditional plan. We're still working at that 6-foot plan, having to get creative, trying to see how we can do that to get everyone back on that. But we're working, as I mentioned, a 6-foot plan, a 3-foot plan. And then also one of the plans we're gonna be forced to come to terms with is what they call continuous learning 2.0. They call that continuous learning 2.0. It's basically what we did this last spring, which is online, everything at home. We're gonna be forced to at least develop a plan in the event that this spikes and schools are closed again, or because of an outbreak and we have to shift to an online version. We'll be working with our staff on the ability to move from an on-site plan to an online plan within a very short amount of time, so that there's not a lot of lost or wasted time in between that. So we'll need to look at that. Any plan that involves complete online plans for next year will have a couple of differences already from this last spring. 2 of them that we already know about. If we're forced to go to a complete online plan, there will be expectations on attendance. So we'll have to track attendance for students engaged and involved in that. The second part we know we'll have to, that's already been decided, is that there will be specific information on grading and required grades and things like that. So there will be some changes from this last spring if we are required to go to a fully online platform. So how are we going to develop these plans? Our district, we're having to work with our county health department, which for us would be Walla Walla County. This is kind of Burbank, where, as we all know, living here, kind of one of those weird situations where we're technically closer to Franklin and Benton County, but in Walla Walla County. So our county advises us on our health plans. We're currently in phase 2 of the governor's plan. So phase 2 requires us to submit plans and work with our health department. It doesn't require the health department to approve those plans. It's just we have to work in coordination with them, and they will advise us of best practices in terms of that. So we'll submit that to our health department. Those districts that are probably closer to us in the Tri-Cities, currently Benton and Franklin County, if you're following the news, you know they've gone from phase 1.0 to now phase 1.5. Districts across the state that stay in that 1.0 or 1.5, there are requirements of approval by the health department, because there's some additional specifications those districts will need to meet, still being in 1 or 1.5. Currently, again, Walla Walla County, we're at 2.0. Last week, the governor put a halt on any and all movement for the better part of 2 weeks as he opened up those counties, Yakima, Benton, and Franklin County, that were in 1.0 to 1.5. And while they were doing that, they put all the state's movements on hold. So we won't hear anything about any movement in Walla Walla County at the very earliest until mid to late July, possibly as early as the 16th, but we don't anticipate anything any earlier than that. So as far as working on our back to school plans, so we'll submit our plans, work with our health department, submit those plans to our health department. They also have to go to the school board, and that we'll be looking at doing that in late July or August. So those plans will go before our board for them to look at. And then finally, once that's been done, the third piece is we must submit our plans to OSPI. That's the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. That's in Olympia. And that must be done 2 weeks prior to the first day of school. School plans. So for us, our first day of school is early September. That would require us to submit that plan to OSPI by August 19th, as you can see there. Want to remind or inform, if you're not familiar with this, Governor Inslee's phase approach. Again, this is the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. It has absolutely no bearing on the start of school. And that's something some people are not familiar with. Some people believe that has something to do with if schools can start or not. All schools across the state, per State Superintendent Chris Reichdahl, all schools are expected to open on time in the fall. But they will look different depending on where you live across the state. School will look different in regions that are in phase 3 and 4 than those that are in 1 or even 2. Depending on where you're at and what those levels and those numbers look like, it will cause your schools to look a little bit differently. What we know is schools will start, and they will start on time, but they will and could look different depending on where you live. So let's see, am I missing anything? First day of school, I mentioned, you can see there is on Wednesday, September 2nd. So that's what we know of so far on our plans. So where are we at? Where is the Columbia School District at currently in our planning process? So we are in the middle of examining our physical spaces across our district to determine really how many students we can safely put into our buildings in classrooms, according to currently, Washington State Department of Health. The current number we have to work with is 6 feet. I've mentioned that previously. That's the known. That's what the current plans will require, 6 feet of separation. Put some more folks in. So we know that the current plan, we'll call this Plan A, will require 6 feet of separation. And I want to remind everyone, again, this could change as of tomorrow. But what we know of right now is that 6 feet is the current number that we have to separate staff, students, and so that's the task we have in front of us. So having to separate 6 feet, we know first and foremost that's a problem. It's a problem because that is not the way traditionally schools are set up. In fact, in the last several decades, we've been moving more towards a lot more cooperative learning, desk, table working. Students are working together more than, we can say back when many of us were in school. So it's kind of backwards from the model that schools have been going to. So that creates a problem for districts all across the state. So looking at this 6 foot separation, to give you more of a visual, why is this a problem? So these are not pictures from Columbia School District. These are ones just got off the internet, but they're showing just a traditional, and this is an elementary classroom, looking at 2 different seating arrangements. One is your traditional desks, students facing the front of the board in rows in a traditional manner. And then you see on the right more of a traditional group setting where desks, or a lot of times schools now have tables where students are working together in groups, working cooperatively throughout the day. So this is kind of what they look like in general. And the problem is with this new 6 foot distancing, it requires seating that's going to look more like this. So you can see moving from a traditional seating to where seats look more like this, you can see moving from there to there, classrooms are going to begin looking more and more like this because there's a requirement they have to be seated 6 feet from each other, which will limit the number of students we can fit into the square footage of each of our classrooms. So therein lies the biggest problem for districts. Well, I shouldn't say the biggest problem, but one of the biggest problems to getting all students back 5 days a week. So just kind of a visual for that. So what does this look like for us? Here's a specific example from Columbia High School. Here on the left-hand side, you can see kind of a before and after picture showing a high school set up in a traditional manner. The picture is taken from the front of the room, so you can see desks all lined up in the row facing the front. And then you've got, after we consider looking at social distancing, what that looks like and what that does to that classroom. It limits the number of students you can fit into that space. If you want to look at now a space at the middle school, this is a classroom at our current Columbia Middle School. Again, space 6 feet out from where they're seating. It just creates, you can see students are spaced much more. They're further spread out from each other than they're traditionally used to. And then I'm missing a picture in there. I had one from our elementary, but sorry, that didn't show up in there. So what's the results and what does this mean for us? Over the last couple of weeks, we've been going around physically measuring square footage of every single room in our district because we have to figure out really what is our, and we're using the term COVID capacity, how many students we can fit into the classrooms. How many can we do this safely? Keep in mind, plan A would be 6 foot, which is why you want to see what that looks like. We'll be looking at a separate plan that looking at, as I mentioned, 3 foot. So figuring that out, looking at those spaces. If you look at, again, really early numbers, these are just big averages, and I will tell you there's a lot of numbers that go beyond this that make this a little bit more difficult, but just to show you kind of big picture what this would look like. You can see our 3 schools we have here, elementary, middle school, and high school, the average class size this last year, simply just taking the enrollment, dividing by the number of rooms. So you can see on the left-hand side, the elementary school had 22, middle school had 23, and our high school had 19. And then if you look at what is the 6 foot capacity, and so we literally went in there with tape measures, measured off, we started moving desks, tables around, and keep in mind this 6 foot capacity is a learning capacity. So this is not, we want to be real up front, say this is not like a student stuff right in front of the door. There's fire code issues with that. This is not a student stuff right up against the heater or anything like that, or stuff right up against the whiteboard looking straight up. These numbers would be considered the maximum we could fit in considering a learning environment. You can see the elementary is at 15, the middle school is at 17, and the high school is at 22. So the problem with that is you look to the right, so our reality is that currently as it sits, the elementary lacks classroom square footage right now. You can see there's a difference of 7. And again, this is big picture overall average numbers. Elementary has 2 problems. One is the lack of square footage, and it's not they don't have enough space. We have big gym spaces, we have big cafeteria spaces. All those were measured and considered as we look at all of these. But when the time when that building was built, you're looking really at the square footage of the actual classroom spaces. The classroom spaces themselves, they're not as big as we would like them to be in terms of when they were built at the time. So it makes the elementary troublesome for the 6 foot capacity. We're running short on that right now. So what we're doing right now is trying to get really creative, saying, okay, if we're short, what are the other options that we could look at that would give us the opportunity to still open up 5 days a week? And those are all the pieces that we're looking at right now. For the middle school, again, you can see the average class size is 23, 6 foot capacity would be 17. We're still short. The middle school is a different problem though. Middle school, the size and the number of students we can fit in there, we just don't have enough staff members to split them up. So we'd have to bring on additional staff to do that. So our ratio from staff to student is off there. High school, as we sit right now, With a 6-foot capacity, we could open up our high school currently right now with an average class size of 19. With a 6-foot capacity, we can look at holding 22 in classes. So we do have the adequate square footage right now as we currently sit to open up our high school as we sit. So presents some unique challenges for us as a district, where we're saying one of our buildings, we know for sure we certainly can do it. The other two, we're looking at getting creative. How could we make that happen? So early numbers on that. So basically, I've taken us through the information piece. I've taken you through the survey and basically given you where we're at in terms of planning, what our early numbers look like, what our, sorry, I got some more folks coming in. What that would look like. We're going to open this up really for questions. And I've got a couple things. If you look at, I'm going to try and see if I can open up to all the participants. There's a raised hand function on there. We're going to ask that so that we can get to as many questions as we can. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. We'll get to as many as we can. We'll ask you to stick to one question per person at a time. If you've got more than one question, just ask your one question. If there are no other questions, then we'll come back. Everyone will have an additional opportunity to ask additional questions. We just want to make sure everyone's had an opportunity to be heard or ask any questions they may have. So I'm trying to open this up where I can see the raised hand options, but I'll start with any questions that are out there. Or I guess the other piece I could mention is if you're hesitant to use the raised hand function and you'd rather type in your question, under the chat function, you could also type in your question. I can look at the chat comment box and I can answer your questions from there as well. So I'm going to open this up for questions. Don't see any yet. Okay, question in the chat box. What does fall sports look like right now? Good question on fall sports. WIA is continuing to meet. In fact, they made a ruling. Jay, if you're on this, you want to correct anything I've said that's wrong on anything here. What we do know is that we as a district, we can say right now, have pushed back summer conditioning and practicing, things like that. There's a plan that had to been put into place. We're not meeting the threshold standards in terms of where we're at in the phasing piece to begin the summer athletics, conditioning, sports, those pieces. So summer conditioning, sports, those pieces, that's been put off, and we will not resume or begin any of those pieces at this point. Fall question, so I just want to start with that, even though it wasn't your question, Dana. Fall sports, right now, I know the deadline, or sorry, the start date, not deadline, the start date has been pushed back. It's early September, and I want to say it's September 5th or 2nd. We're not going to be able to begin until we get, so I could be wrong on those dates. I'm just going off memory. The 5th or the 7th is when we'll be looking at right now. They're setting to start before any districts can start practices. But I know there's also another WIA meeting. They'll be coming up here in the next few weeks where they'll have additional information on that, because they're still talking about everything under the sun concerning fall sports, to when we start to if we'll start. So let's see. Any other questions in the chat? Okay, we'll be able to have recess, and what will that look like? The plan is, it's been initially communicated, there will be the availability of recess. Obviously, we don't know exactly what that will look like yet. Let's just use the obvious. You know, is it reasonable to expect that we can keep 6 feet of separation between preschoolers, kindergartners, or let's just say any number of students in a recess type setting? They're still working on language and guidance for us on what that looks like. We're having different types of conversations, from alternating recess schedule, so you wouldn't have as many students out there at the same time, so you don't run into that. But again, all of those creates its own unique challenges because you need to staff those, and so that would mean we'd need more staffing doing recess time versus in classrooms and things. So there's pros and cons to all of them. There's no conversation right now, I can tell you, of eliminating recess. But all of those will be, how do we go about doing that the best? Next question. I missed the beginning. Is there going to be preschool? Yeah, there's no conversation of not having preschool at this point. Right now, the plan is to continue with preschool. Another question on the chat is, are you considering moving 8th grade to high school building or hiring more staff? What I will tell you is everything's open. So there's nothing we're not considering. When you talk about moving grade levels and things like that, so if I go back to, let me go back to my presentation in terms of this. If you look at just sheer space and size, and you can see when we talked about this, the high school has adequate footage, okay, square footage. And so, you know, we could look at adding that. The middle school also has square footage is okay. It's a lack of staff. So are we going to at least entertain the conversation of, do we want to move some things around, whether that's 8th grade to high school, maybe 5th goes to the middle school? All those questions will be entertained. If that gives us the ability to pull school off 5 days versus not, all of those things will be considered. I want to be really clear that, you know, that's not something that we would just take lightly and say, all right, we're going to do this and do this, and all of a sudden make a decision and start that tomorrow. There'd be communication going on out there regarding that. But we're having all those conversations with the idea, again, our goal. What's our goal? To get everyone back 5 days a week if we can do that safely. So we'll consider any and all options for that. We got some more folks joining. So let's take a look at any other questions. I don't see any hand raising or chat comments. Keep those coming in if you have any questions. We still have an hour and 15 minutes. Other questions? So I had a question about the questionnaire, how that turned out. So that's what I spent the first half of the meeting going over. And so what I will do with the questionnaire, so people and everyone can look at putting that out there, we'll put that information out there on Facebook, so you can look at, see how that went out. This presentation, as I mentioned, will be recorded, so you can see how all those questions went out there. I was pleased, I can say, with the participation in that. And so I was excited that we felt like we got quite a few folks providing their opinion on that. And we'll have that information out there. You can take a look at that, but I just won't go through each one of those questions again. So question, if I keep my kid out of school for the first month, would it be held against the kids? So, you know, there's still requirements for attendance. Parents can choose to homeschool. That's still obviously an option. But there's a question about would it be held against the kids? You know, you're either going to have to enroll in whatever option if you're choosing to maintain in the district, whether that's 5 days a week, whether that's if we go to an alternate day schedule, or again, you can choose to go a different option. That's always still obviously available to parents. But as far as held against the kids, there's nothing that's really going to be held against the kids. They're working on State Board of Education. That's kind of an Olympia group. They're working on information on what that would look like in terms of mandatory attendance regulations, rules, and things like that. But we're trying to get everyone in. We want to get everyone in, as we've mentioned. I guess I'm not sure how else to answer that in terms of being held against them, but students and parents will have the option. One of the things we'll look at, even going back to a 5-day a week or an alternating A-B schedule, is the idea of some parents may choose to want to do an online option, and that'll be one of the things we will also consider. So what we're hoping to be able to do is be able to provide that option for parents as well. So maybe it'll just give you some choice in that matter. So maybe that would help answer that a little bit. Another question, at the elementary level, will students continue to rotate through classes or stay in the same room throughout the day? That has not been finalized yet. I can tell you our traditional model obviously rotates kids through when they become specialists. We've had conversations. Sorry, I'm going to let some more folks in. We've had conversations about what that would look like if the kids stayed put and teachers moved around in those. That becomes troublesome. I mean, it's possibly could be done at the elementary, even though that's still tricky. But it becomes much more difficult at the middle school and high school levels because those students go lots of different directions. They don't stay in that same group. You've got some going this way and that way. So that makes scheduling very challenging. So at the secondary level, that would prove to be very difficult. We'll have conversations to see, is it possible? Yes. We don't know where we'll end up with that one yet. So getting some more questions. So if kids end up having to wear masks, how does that affect the kids with medical issues, and how are you going to work that out? So concerning masks, again, I know masks is a, we'll just say it's a very polarizing, conversation piece. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of do and don't. Right now, we're required to have, masks. Face shields have been approved, as I said, at the Walla Walla County level. So the question is, how would that work out? The expectation would be that they would be expected to wear some sort of mask, face shield. However, there are provisions that for students under a certain age and under certain conditions, I know there are some provisions for that. So we will have to work through how we work those provisions out, but I know those are out there, and we're having conversations about how we address that. Technology question. Will the middle school offer students devices if distance learning is utilized, or older elementary school kids? Yeah, so good question on technology, because I haven't addressed this really at all. I'm really excited to say last year at the Columbia High School at 912 was the first year we were able to do take-home one-to-one devices. That's something we had planned, obviously, before we saw this coming out. And I don't want to call it being lucky, but I guess we're glad we planned it this way. The plan all along was to begin at the middle school one-to-one take-home beginning this next year anyways, before any of this occurred. So we're fortunate that that has been our plan all along. We've been planning that and preparing and stocking up devices, getting ready for this. So I am excited and happy to say that in the middle school, regardless of whatever model we go with, whether it's 5 days a week, we go an alternating A-B schedule, or a full continuous learning 2.0, any and all of those options, middle school levels at grades 6 through 8, all will have a take-home one-to-one technology Chromebook that will be used at that. So we will, at the start of this next year, 6-12 be full one-to-one take-home, which I'm excited about. That still leaves a challenge for us at the elementary level. If we're to go to a distance learning, continuous learning model, we are looking at how do we still prioritize families that need devices, wireless, things like that. And our goal is to find, if, again, that's a last resort for us, if we have to go to a full online piece, or even, an A-B piece, if we have to go to that and we still have those families that struggle, that either connectivity is an issue with wireless, or obviously a device. We'll have to find out who those are and get those out to them. So if kids are homeschooled, can they participate in school sports? Kids that are homeschooled can always opt into those pieces. They can opt into certain subjects in schools. That's always been available. So that's available to our community, and even in school sports. Good questions. So scanning. Oh, I see right there, Marie. Do you have a
Hi.
question?
And I missed the very first part of it, so you may have addressed this.
That's okay. Try it anyways.
Okay. My concern is our teachers kind of got thrust into this as well as the students. What kind of training are we going to make sure teachers get for providing quality online education?
Yeah, very good question. So thank you for asking that. That really began last spring. As you mentioned, everyone really across the state was thrown into that. So you're talking everyone across the state was dealing with that, really trying to play catch up in terms of that. We started working with, his name is Jeff Utek. We had some specific staff, key staff, we'll say selected staff, start working through some of that stuff this last spring. And we're going to continue to work through that. We're trying to see what we can get set up in August. Nothing specifically has been set up, but there is a lot of information out there for kind of the experts on how to best go about offering distance learning. And you started to see some of those things. I know it was slow, and I apologize, sometimes painful, as we all went through this last spring. You saw early on, I would say the evolution of even our district in that short time, going from a lot of packets and sheer volume, to where we began adjusting to more specific content, starting with some of those office hours and the instructional lessons you began seeing uploaded. That was a short snippet of some of the evolution of the change you began seeing out of some of that work. We'll have to continue that. But, to answer it right up front, we don't have that set up yet right now. A lot of that depends on what model we're going to. If we're able to get everyone back 5 days a week, well, that changes, if we have to go to an AB or full online, that's going to adjust how we do that. So that's not set up yet, but it is something that we're looking at. Did I answer that best I could?
Yeah, I just know I'm doing some Zoom classes for my grandson.
Yeah.
He's going into third grade and he's in New York.
Oh,
And it was a real, I taught a lot of years,
sure.
but it was a real test to my ability to provide for him meaningful classes and instruction on new topics that he'd never had before.
Sure.
I didn't want to give him just practice and practice and practice of the same crapola.
Sure. Yeah. As you're mentioning, that it was tough. We saw that, we heard that, we understood that. And we knew, everyone was kind of upside down at that point, and we were doing our best. The first and foremost was to try and get work out there for our families. And again, we began adjusting that as we went along. So it's going to be a continued evolution.
Yeah. I do have a question on the mask situation.
Okay.
I have visions of that. I have visions of kids coming into middle school. First of all, they never had a pencil. How are we going to make sure they have a mask? As many pencils as I provided over 32 years, I can imagine I can't afford to provide all the masks too.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it puts the teacher at such a disadvantage, not knowing what's going on behind that mask.
Yeah.
And all you're seeing is the eyes, and consequently, is that a blank look? Do they understand? Are they upset? Are they even with me? It's really difficult just seeing the eyeballs.
Yep. So right now, what we know, and what I can answer, Marie, right now, is that we know the masks or some sort of device, it's required. There's no way around that right now. And that's really coming from the State Department of Health through our county. So that is a required piece. So to answer yours in terms of providing them or having them, the survey that we showed that cloth masks are the, at least those taking the survey were the preferred method. So we're hoping, and again, we assume we have to figure all these pieces out in our plan, but we're assuming and hoping many students will bring those with them. Obviously, we can't guarantee that, and so we're going to have to be prepared with something if and when students get on a bus show up or dropped off without a mask, we're going to have some options for that, because the requirement is they have to have something right now. Again,
Yeah, I had visions of Darth Vader masks and their father's welding apparatus on their heads. I mean, these are middle schools. I would not doubt that for a minute.
yeah. So, yep, we're working through that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a few more questions here on the group chat. I want to make sure I get to. People are talking about homeschooling. Is that offered through the district, or you find outside sources? So when people choose to homeschool, they're choosing to find the materials, go through those pieces. So we don't offer a homeschooling per se program. When parents choose to homeschool, they're choosing to take on that responsibility. So hope I answered that. My comment in homeschooling was some parents in our community that choose to homeschool have options. They come and partake in bits and pieces of, whatever it is, whether that's athletics, PE, they want to take an advanced course offering, things like that. They have the ability to opt in to do that. So hopefully that answers that a little bit. Another question, if schools go to half online and half, that's moving, half teacher interaction, will homeschool packets still be an option? So that question's asking if we go to what we call the hybrid AB, type schedule, will packets still be an option? Nothing has been decided, yes or no. I would imagine yes. I know we got feedback from the write-in parts of the community about maybe how confusing it was trying to interface using multiple, whether it's Google Classroom, and early on we're trying to communicate through lots of different avenues. The idea was, can we find a single, simplify it to where parents go to one spot to find these things for our community. So that will be something we'll be taking into consideration for the online piece. But to answer the question, will home packets still be an option? Right now, I believe so. Nothing's been decided that they won't be. Any changes to the choice transfer? Any limits, thresholds for students going in and out of the districts? Choice transfer, no changes have been made to that yet. However, that'll be something that'll be certainly coming up. Will come up for conversation, let me say. So what someone's asking is choice transfer, students choosing to choice in or choice out, either to another district choosing out or opting to come in. We have twice as many students opting to choose in that we have choosing out. So we do have a good number of students that come in. And really where that question, I believe, is going to require some additional thought is, if you look at the numbers that we had here that I discussed earlier, and we're able to open up, let's use hypothetically and say we're able to open up the high school 5 days a week in a as close to traditional fashion as possible. Yet neighboring districts aren't doing that, and they're going to full online or alternate ABs. There will be conversations about, students opting to choose schools based on how much school they get versus, what that experience is. So we'll need to have conversations. We have the ability to limit transfers, but none of those conversations have been had at this point. Because right now we have the room and we have the space. So another question, how can learning to read get extra help if it's online learning? How many hours should we dedicate to online learning per day? So there's actually a science behind that. I mentioned the name of someone we were beginning to look at for online learning, because our traditional on-site learning is what we're the experts of, is on-site, right? But the online learning was kind of something new that we all had to struggle with. So there is a science out there in terms of how much time students should be spending in front of that computer or doing online pieces. And the science really around that is, what does that activity look like, and how do we design those to where they can come on and get that lesson, but then go away and do that, whether that's project-based, using different choice grids and things like that, to where they're not actually stuck in front of that screen the entire time while they're doing that. Some of that's necessary, but yes, there's not an expectation if we go full online learning. I can tell you that we're going to be expecting kids to sit in front of a computer screen from 8 a.m. till 2:30 p.m. that day. That would be punishment for most kids. So I say that tongue in cheek, joking, but yeah, that's there. So reading if there's any other questions. How many hours? Again, I don't remember off the top of my head. Let's see. Checking to see if Andrew's on here, if you remembered any of that. Andrew, do you remember any of those numbers in terms of online learning? Do you remember? No, it's fine. Just thought I'd ask.
Online learning in terms of what again?
How many? The question was asked. Is there a specific number of how many hours should be dedicated to online learning? I know we went through some of that stuff with Jeff UTech and stuff. I just don't remember the number off the top of my head. You remember at all? Any chance?
Yeah, not quite recalling at the moment.
What I do remember is it wasn't as much as I thought, though. That's, I guess, what I could say I was surprised at. So, okay, thank you, Andrew. Just thought I'd check. Okay, couple of other questions. Letting some more folks in. By making students wear masks and the 6-foot distance guidelines, isn't that infringing on their constitutional rights? Again, I'm not going to wage into the whether we should or not. What I know is that right now, the Department of Health, if we are to open up, it's a requirement. So, next question, how will PE work with the requirements to wear masks? PE is going to be an interesting piece. It's one of those conversation pieces we're having about how that would look at each level, because that may look a little different at each building, and the students' ability to get that down, what that would look like within their schedule. So, obviously, when we start up those conversations, we would like to do as much of that stuff as we can outside. That's not always possible, but we'd like to do that. There is science behind, being outside is better than, being in that building with those sheer numbers. And so when we can do that, we will certainly do that. But I think PE, while it's not finalized yet, it's going to look a little bit different. I know we've had conversations about PE and then becoming health, and some of that looking differently. But again, all that's going to vary based on the age of the students. So we don't have the PE answer yet. What about kids on IEP? What does that look like now, and what are the options? I'm struggling how to answer that because I'm not sure what we're looking for. Is this in terms of just coming back to school? There's a follow-up on that, or? Going back to school. So students on IEPs, what does it look like now? I mean, our goal is to get everyone back 5 days a week if we can. So obviously, if we can, we're trying to get all students back 5 days a week. There will be some conversation about if we're forced to go to an alternating day schedule, what does that look like? I know those conversations have been had. We've been challenged top down at the state level to say some of those students that are in need of additional academic support, whether that's second language students on IEPs, how does that look concerning their schedule? Do they have additional time? Again, we haven't figured those answers out yet, but they are things we are considering. So we don't know exactly what that'll look like yet. Any other questions? Has Sodexo been in communication with the district regarding lunch and breakfast? So yes, we've been in conversation with Sodexo. In fact, as of just today, and I was talking with them again yesterday. But depending on the truth of that is, it depends on what schedule we're in. So first and foremost, if we're on 5 days a week, then obviously that looks different. If we're on an alternating schedule, there's some other complications if we're on like I said, an AB schedule. Because the idea is we're still expected to serve and offer breakfast and lunch. If we had an alternating schedule, the conversation would be, do we provide on those off days meals to those students as they leave? So they're like getting a breakfast and lunch as they go? Or are we running a breakfast and lunch on site and then still busing options out there if we have an alternate? That hasn't been decided, but we're having those conversations for that. The other question would be, let's just assume meals on campus, because that might have been the question anyways that you're asking, would be the state has already approved, and we know they've approved a waiver for grab and go lunches. So what we feel confident we know is that due to the size, space, and those pieces, they're suggesting, and I know the health department's already talked to us, that they're not suggesting we do any lunches in any common area spaces. So that would be like cafeteria, commons areas. They're suggesting, again, giving it back to the districts, finding ways we either do a couple things. You limit the number and the access around how many students are around. So they're suggesting either one, you go outside, which would be the outside component. They believe that's better with the fresh air, or B, you get that done in classrooms. So it's looking like, however this plays out, whether you go 5 days a week, alternating schedules, lunch will look differently next year. We know that. Upon returning to school, 20% who lack adequate access to online learning. How's this school going to address the situation on top of traditional summer slide and all students? So I mentioned previously that high school's 1-to-1. So we still have some that we need to look at in terms of the wireless access. So that's still going to be an issue. Beginning next year, I mentioned earlier that grades 6 through 8 will be full 1-to-1 take home. That has been in the plans for a year at this point. So we know that another building will be taken care of 1-to-1 take home. And so we're looking at ways how we can, and I'm going to call it worst case scenario, if we were to go to another full online, that how we can provide access to that. We've already got a good start. We've already got Chromebooks available to each grade level. It would be prioritizing how we get those out to our students and families who are most at need at the primary or elementary levels. We'd have to figure out a way of somehow figuring out how we figure out who are those, I guess, that are most at need. The second part on that is we began some conversations with REA, wireless companies. We're starting to have conversations about what we can do, because the other problem outside of just devices is wireless access. And we have some areas in our community that struggle to pick up wireless as well as maybe some of the other areas. And so I know that's a problem. We're looking at how we provide really community access to wireless in remote areas, locations. Wireless companies are more, having looked in that, are more interested in getting you signed up really to, asking districts to, how am I trying to say this, get them set up in the households. But there's some problems with that because they want you to sign on. And well, I won't get into it. There's just some complications into, getting some of those individually in the houses that would require some additional steps. So we're looking at that. I feel pretty good about where we're at device-wise, next year being full 1-to-1, 6-12, and having a decent start. We hope and believe by the end of next year, our hope is that we are full 1-to-1 pre-12, obviously at the elementary level, not sending that home, but that actually has been part of a plan pre-COVID. So we've been trying to increase our technology access across our district for some time now. So hopefully that answered that question. Any other questions? Really good questions. Trying to go back and see if there's hands raised or any in the comment box. Keep them coming. I've still got time. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so I will stay here as long as we need, as long as there's still questions. Again, I go back kind of the plan and the timeline. We're looking at having a plan set and ready to go by the end of this month, end of July, early August. We'll be coming up with multiple plans that we're going to have to be prepared and ready to, move between plans. Right now, the current number we have and we know we have to meet is 6 foot. And we'll have another plan prepared that we're ready to move to if we're allowed to go to 3 foot. We don't know how that will play out. We'll have a full online option. And I guess the other one I haven't really addressed is that if we're forced to go to an AB schedule or an alternate schedule and we're not able to get everyone back, the other reality we need to be prepared for is that if we start the AB schedule and we start the year and our numbers dictate that we can move to a full online just because of the number of students who are A, not enrolled, or B, doing some other option, we will be and need to be ready, prepared to move to an alternating schedule back to a 5-day schedule if numbers dictate we can do that. But again, all of that is governed by our state Department of Health working through local county and as we submit those plans. So, okay, we had another question. Can mobile classrooms be available for not having enough square footage in the grade school? So we have not made any decisions on bringing anything in mobile. What I will tell you is we're looking at every site as a possible classroom site though. So I know that sounds different and kind of scary, even to the point of when I said we walked through and did square footage, we measured every space, including office spaces. We measured cafeteria spaces with the idea, if we're not having lunches in cafeterias, can they be used for classroom space for that? While it's not optimal, if you told me that was the difference in going 5 days a week and we're able to work something out to make a somewhat, we'll say, quality learning environment out of it, we're not leaving any stone unturned. We're looking at every space. So we're looking at it in all of our buildings: commons, auditorium, gym space, any of those pieces. So, Roger, do you have a question?
Yeah, hey Todd. So just a quick question about with 20% of kids really struggling with access last year, I'm just envisioning that there's going to be a pretty wide variety of children in terms of their readiness for the school year. I'm just curious how you all are going to meet that challenge or try to address it at least.
So can I clarify your question, Roger? Are we speaking more to the possibility of students that missed time this last spring, or the idea that they may not be prepared and ready to take on the challenges of online this fall if it comes to that? I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, well, it's probably a bit of all that, I guess.
Okay.
Just speaking for my child, she really missed the in-class instruction, and I don't think it was a full year of education for her. And I'm kind of curious about the learning expectations for this coming year. And then also, there's this whole summer slide thing, and I just imagine it's a little bit larger given what we had this past spring. And so it's just I'm imagining you guys are dealing with trying to make up the gap left from last year on top of the learning expectations that you would have with any given year.
Yeah, so that has been discussed. And I can tell you, I don't have the answer to that yet, but we began discussing that. I can tell you, depending on the level, each level creates its own unique challenges. students at the grade level moving just from one grade to the next. I don't want to say it's easier, but it's easier to figure out in terms of the standards in which they met. Going back to previous standards where things took off. We've had conversations about what does that look like, because we know, in fact, as you're saying, you have a normal summer gap. But yes, it would be reasonable to expect that we're going to get much more than just a summer gap. It's been conversations with superintendents across our whole area about how do we go begin battling what that looks like. And it really just requires us to kind of go back to, the nuts and bolts of kind of where we left off and trying to pick up and move forward with that. So the fall will not look traditionally, the first month of school will not look like the traditional first month of school in previous years. We're gonna have to go back and look at those pieces. Where that becomes, I believe, even more challenging is sometimes in the upper levels, when you're talking about moving something from like algebra to geometry, do you go back in the geometry class and go back prepping some of the things that they missed in algebra and things like that, because while they're still all math, they're separate pieces. And so, we're having those conversations, how we go about doing that. It is a unique challenge like we've never seen before, but it's fair to say there's no way we can expect September to look like what all the rest of our Septembers have looked like. So we're going to have to deal with that kind of building by building, team by team, and begin working on that. Our teachers have been great, working together and really put a lot of time and effort into that. Really just kind of finishing up, trying to learn how to operate differently under that. And there's going to be a new learning curve in the fall with that. So, and I hope you heard me talk a little bit about the technology piece. We're better positioned to handle that this year than we've ever been. And by the end of the year, we'll even be in a better position for that. We're going to have devices all across our district. It still will be a challenge to figure out connectivity and wireless, and that's something we're still take on. But we're looking at using our local partners with that, whether that's REA or cell companies, things like that. Other questions? Well, I do not see any other questions. So I guess I will make a last call for any questions. Going once, going twice. Okay. What will the district's plan be? Someone did ask a question at the end. If someone gets sick. So we will have to immediately work with the known part of this is, the someone piece is, well, who? Is it a student? Is it a staff member? We'll address those both beginning immediately with the health department. They start with their contact tracing. Again, some of this will be determined if we're at 5 days a week or alternating schedules, but they'll immediately go back to, when were they last here? Who were they with? I can tell you we have asked this question of our health department because the first question we wanted to ask was, hypothetically, if someone gets sick in the middle school, and let me not say sick, let's say we have a confirmed case of COVID, and we get back there, what's our next step? Again, they said, we'll go back, we'll start the contact tracing. What we were trying to get out of is there an automatic, like, this classroom gets shut down, this school gets shut down, the district gets, they said, you can't make any assumptions on that. So the first step, first and foremost, we'll contact the county health department, and they will begin working with us. We've had to do that once already this spring, and it worked out pretty quick, pretty slick. And they have said it can be as extreme as your entire district, but it could also be as minimum as they suggest 1, 2, or 3 students stay home and self-quarantine. So there's no one right answer for that question. Teachers is a other unique challenge because that'll be, something different if we get a confirmed case of staff. Obviously, again, we'll still work through the health department. They will lead us through that process. There's different things we have to consider in terms of leave and subs and things like that, but we'll have to approach that with the guidance of our local health department. Last call for questions. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. We're done a little early, but unless there's any last questions, I encourage you just, if you do have any questions or things come up, don't hesitate to call the district office. The purpose of this, we're trying to inform our community as much as possible to keep you up to date on what the latest plans are. And we're working day and night still to get that done with the goal in mind. End of July, I'll say it again, early August, we hope to have a plan in place for our community. That'll give us plenty of time to begin making preparations for the year and getting that information out to our families. So, good question came in late, was kids self-quarantine for 14 days. How will it affect their attendance? Obviously, they would be gone. There is ways that I can tell you, this is good information. The State Board of Education, which governs all rules and regulations for public schools across the state, they met yesterday and they met today. And I have not heard the results of the 2-day meeting. I know they were meeting to discuss everything from waivers of instructional hours and days and how that plays out for this next year. But I know they were meeting today. They were discussing everything from high-risk areas to music and PE and those pieces. What do they do to the PE minutes regulations if schools operate PE to look a little bit differently? And so part of that is also, I'm going to go back to the question, which is attendance. There's going to be some flexibility in attendance. We know that because your attendance drives funding in schools. And so there's been conversation about how, if we're to continue that and schools are on these alternating day schedules because they just simply can't fit them in there, hypothetically, what would that look like? And what do districts or students or parents have to do in order to be counted or attending? And so those rules will change from last spring to this spring. We know that because last spring they truly came out and just said, look, do no harm. And we know in the fall there will be some requirements on, in order to be counted, you need to engage in something. So that right now, online engagement doesn't fit the rule of attendance, but it will, and they're making adjustments on that. So if you're self-quarantining for 14 days, and I guess you're able to, you're not super sick, I guess the easy answer to that would be to go to the continuous learning 2.0 option, and you're able to attend and do things as best we can online if you're wanting to still continue, stay up and do those pieces. We're hoping to have that option for any and all students, especially if we run a 5-day-a-week schedule or we run an alternating day schedule. We're still looking at what would an online option look like for students or parents that want to engage in something like that. So we're going to consider all of these options. So, okay, anything else? I appreciate all your attendance, all your questions, and I guess the last thing I would say is I really appreciate all your patience. This has been something we're trying to continue to keep students and our parents and our staff and everyone at the front of every decision we make. And we're doing everything that we can to get kids back 5 days a week. That has always been our goal. We're trying to do that. We need to make sure we do that in a safe manner. We believe our students, our community, we believe they deserve that. I've got my own. I know there's many children out there, and so we're working really, really hard day and night to try to make this happen. And so I understand it's frustrating not having all the answers, but our goal was to get out to the community good information. We didn't want to put out a lot of information, have to correct. So the delay in some of this was we want to make sure we had good, solid information to send out there to our community and not changing from plan A to plan B to plan C to plan D at this point. So thank you for your patience. We'll continue to do our best to communicate and get that information out to everyone. And stay tuned, and we appreciate your support. Thank you for being here this evening.